cybersecurity program lead at Argonne National Laboratory, and I'm just giving you kind of a quick overview of a variety of the things within cybersecurity and kind of a quick cybersecurity awareness sort of lecture. So as such, we're going to go over kind of three things today. We're going to talk about the CIA model. We're going to talk about just generalized risk assessment, and then we're going to talk about kind of the attack chain. Next slide, please. So with that, the CIA model, not to be confused with the Central Intelligence Agency, but in cybersecurity, that stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So with that, most organizations, when they look at their cybersecurity footprint, they look at it and they sort of group their policies and procedures and their response into these three high-level focus areas. And most companies, most organizations out there tend to focus on one of these more heavily than the others. So for example, confidentiality is the concept around protecting data. So with that, it's having certain secrets, having certain information that you don't want anybody else to see. So you can imagine organizations like banks, organizations like medical facilities, organizations that are protecting social security numbers, credit card numbers, care about protecting data, that confidentiality side of it. The next easiest one to grasp is the availability side. That is that services and sites are available and you can access them. You may have noticed last night there was a considerable amount of denial of service attacks across the internet. There were a lot of things that went down due to availability attacks on them. Everything from Apple's iCloud service to Microsoft went down last night, to a lot of gaming servers, if you guys are into the various gaming components or things like that, all went down due to availability attacks, that sort of loss of availability. And so there are organizations out there that focus very heavily on availability. The media, for example, various content providers, Disney, who I used to work for and have a background with. So there's organizations out there that, as you can imagine, focus a lot on availability. Integrity is a little more challenging to sort of grasp. Integrity is that the amount of, or the types of data are accurate and they're not changing without proper permission accordingly. So with this, a lot of people think, well, if you're talking about integrity and you're talking about facts, maybe the media tends to fall in there. Well, we all know with the advent of fake news and with the advent of a lot of those components, that's become a challenging factor. A great example of sort of an organization that tends to be focused from an integrity perspective tends to be a financial institution like a bank. It's very important, right, when I log into a bank that I'm the only person able to log in, right, that there's confidentiality there. It's also very important that my money's available and that I can get to it and do the things I need to do. But the most important factor probably is that the amount of money it says I have is accurate. That I don't have less money than I say. And I mean, maybe it's not as big of a deal if I have more money, but that the accuracy is ideally what you want to focus on. Next slide, please. So with that, in the cybersecurity world, we build something called the information security model. So with that, we kind of break it down into this Rubik's Cube of sort of understanding. So with that, next slide, please. We take our traditional CIA model, so confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and we look at that as sort of crosscuts as part of this. Next slide. And then going down from there, we look at processing, storage, and transmission. So we can imagine those blocks, those sort of rows as, for example, in the storage world, what would be the confidentiality requirements or the confidentiality needs with the data that I'm storing. And so you can see as it's starting them to sort of develop across processing, storage, and transmission. Next slide, please. And then on top of that, there are different types of sort of then protections that can be put in place. There are policies and procedures, there are pieces of technology, and there's education, training, and awareness, kind of that person side of cybersecurity. So next slide. Tying that together from an information security model, you can take any sort of those blocks and sort of understand then where there may be components with that. So we can take like our confidentiality example, what are the pieces of technology that are being used to protect processing of sort of data. So we could talk about types of encryption or types of policies that are followed when you're sending email or things along those lines. Next slide, please. So we take this information security model and we apply it to what's traditionally known as sort of the risk formula. So risk is something you'll use throughout your courses here within this program, and it's traditionally defined as threat, vulnerability, and consequence. The combination of those elements create a sort of risk factor. And so the easiest way to think about this, instead of looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective, is to look at it more from a physical perspective. So like I have a wallet here, right? My wallet, there's obviously a consequence or an impact if my wallet is stolen, right? There's money in it, there's identity in it, there's credit cards in it. There's obviously a vulnerability to it, right? It could be laying out on a desk, even if it's in my pocket, it could be pickpocketed. There's some sort of vulnerability level of somebody potentially wanting to take it. And then there's potentially some threat. There's always going to be some sort of pickpocket out there that wants to make a quick buck. There's always going to be somebody out there wanting to steal identities or something along those lines. So as such, we look at each of those elements and we ask ourselves, how can we reduce the risk, reduce that sort of aspect accordingly? So for example, to reduce consequence in a wallet, I can not carry around as much money, not carry around things like my social security card. To reduce the vulnerability, I can put it in a safer spot so it's not hanging out in the open. I could potentially wear one of those chest, things to put your wallet in, like they recommend when you go to sensitive countries or things like that, in order to sort of reduce the risk. So I can put certain controls like that, put certain policies in place, put types of technology in place to reduce the risk. Next slide, please. However, risk you can never completely eliminate. So there are different ways to reduce it, as we mentioned. There are ways to make it more manageable, and there are ways to sort of handle that or sort of avoid that risk. Within the course, we'll talk about a lot of different mechanisms around that, all the different kind of types of ways to sort of manage risk, whether that's through insurance mechanisms, whether that's through pieces of technology, whether that's through policies and procedures. Next slide, please. And so as such, you can see, the different ways to sort of respond to risk. You can avoid it, you can transfer it through things like outsourcing, you can mitigate it by putting certain controls in place, or you can just accept it, knowing that like the threat may be low or something along those lines. There's not, somebody in my house right now trying to steal my wallet, so it's okay that it's on the table or that it's laying out in the open or something along those lines. Next slide, please. So with that, you'll notice I didn't bring up a lot of examples on reducing threat. That's because reducing threat can be very challenging, especially in the cybersecurity space where we've had this growing threat from nation-state actors. So as part of this course, we go through kind of a different large sort of nation-state actor or large hacktivist group sort of each sort of class period. So you get to learn about Anonymous, you get to learn about APT1, you get to learn about all these kind of very popular sort of threat groups. And so the one I was going to kind of quickly mention here was a group called Operation Cleaver. So next slide, please. So Operation Cleaver is an Iranian-based team, which actually has infiltrated around 50 companies in the critical infrastructure world over the past couple of years. They tend to target energy sector companies, and they tend use spear phishing and credential dumping and a variety of different types of attacks in order to just gain information. They're not trying to shut anything down. They're not trying to cause any integrity types of attacks. It's really a confidentiality sort of focus. They're trying to collect information that could be information for kinetic types of attacks later, or that could be information for a variety of other elements. So next slide, please. They're doing this through a pretty sort of creative way where they're actually copying a website out there called winresume.com, where they renamed the easyresumecreatorpro.com. They then email a bunch of people at these energy companies to say, hey, we'd love to hire you. We'd love to potentially have you come work for us. Next slide, please. Please click here to input your resume, and then as part of that, it pops up this sort of CV creator which installs a small piece of malware on your computer. Next slide, please. That malware compromises your computer and starts looking at all your credentials, and then starts scanning out from your computer to anything else on your network to see if it can log into anything else. That could be printers, that could be other computers, that could be network shares, and then just tries to propagate throughout that entire network. Next slide, please. It's a pretty sort of interesting and very sort of smart group, as they have customized a lot of their wrappers and customized a lot of their extensions to hide where they're from, as well as pull credentials from anything you may have logged into, whether that be Facebook, whether that be a variety of sort of Outlook or email clients or things along those lines. Next slide, please. And they've even sort of hidden where they've come from. So why they may be reaching out from Iran or from another country, they've actually hidden that sort of attribution, so you can't actually see where they actually may be coming from. So if somebody's looking for this, they will actually see it originating from more local traffic, as opposed to a foreign country that may automatically flag as bad traffic or things along those lines. Next slide, please. So bad guys tend to take a variety of sort of attack steps as part of this, and this Operation Cleaver group is one component of that, where they go through this sort of 5-step phase. So they go through a reconnaissance phase, they go through a scanning phase, they then try to gain access, maintain access, and then clear out their tracks accordingly. So next slide, please. So in the reconnaissance world, what they're trying to do is trying to just see where there may be targets that are worth attacking. I sort of, connect this into the physical world to say, and this, unfortunately makes a lot more sense nowadays, right? There's a certain reconnaissance even to how some of these protesters are targeting homes, right? Where they potentially look at houses, look at sort of organizations, and when they see something that sort of flags them as a potential high topic or a high target, they then record that accordingly. So it's effectively like walking by a house and you see it, you notice the house has windows and doors, and those may be ways to break in. That's sort of a reconnaissance sort of first step. Next slide. Then they go through sort of a scanning step. So in our comparison to a home, a scanning step would be, I see a window, I see a door, I walk up to it, I jiggle it to see if it's locked, I try to open the window to see if it'll open, right? I'm doing a scan on it to see if there may be vulnerabilities, to see what locks may be there, to see what other ways to sort of enter may be there, to see potentially how thick the glass is, or if there's an alarm sticker or things like that on there. So doing sort of scanning, which is the same thing in the cyber world. I'm scanning to see what vulnerabilities may exist. Same thing as sort of walking up to a home and looking at what types of vulnerabilities may be there. Next slide, please. Then they gain access or try to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. So they may see that there is a specific lock on sort of a door, and they may know that that lock is pickable, so they exploit that. Same thing in the cyber world. They may see a certain vulnerability, so they launch an attack against it and compromise it. Next slide, please. Then after they get in, they find ways to maintain access. They install backdoors. They create their own users. They find ways to get back into the house as much as they can. They copy keys, so as such, they continue to get as much data as they can. And then next slide. And then on the last piece, they do whatever they can to sort of hide their tracks, to hide where they're coming from, to sort of escape without leaving any sort of evidence. So take as much information as they can. In the cyber world, that can be writing over logs. As you know, in the real world, that can be, cleaning up after yourself, making sure forensic information is not left behind or things along those lines. Next slide, please. So with that, that was sort of a quick sort of summary from a cyber perspective. Again, the two kind of major things to sort of get out of it would be the CIA model, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and then the sort of risk formula, if you haven't seen that before. So threat, vulnerability, and consequence. And if you go around and you think about things in sort of those three areas, the threat, vulnerability, and consequence, that can apply to a lot of things in your life, even from a physical sort of threat perspective as well as cyber. And then the CIA triangle, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability side, when you're looking at different sort of cyber aspects, or even when you look at companies and see their footprint online, or next time you log into Disney Plus or things like that, you can understand sort of why they made certain choices from a security perspective, because they're more interested in availability or integrity or confidentiality accordingly. So with that, if there's any questions, I have that. Otherwise, I think we only have a couple minutes. So I think that was right on time, but Christine can tell me if there's, Christine or Carolyn can tell me if there's anything else for me. So thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Nate. We really appreciate your time. Kelsey, can we open it up for questions? Do we have a couple minutes?
Yeah, I think we do have a couple minutes here before they invite us back to the main room. So go ahead.
Anyone have any questions for Nate?
Everybody got it perfectly. That's great.
You did a brilliant job, Nate.
Everybody's going to sign up for the cyber awareness class, right? Or a variety of cyber courses.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Very exciting.
If you have any other questions about the program too, I'm more than willing to answer them or to help out as best I can. I've been teaching for about two sort of cohorts now, so two sort of sessions. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I've been exposed, and I think it's a wonderful program.
Honestly, my question is more to everyone in the room, and that is, well, first off, is this the entire cohort, or are there some people missing? Either way, is there a way that we can connect afterwards for those who may want to connect?
So this isn't the entire cohort so far. This is just the first batch of our admits here. So there will be quite a few more, but I'm sure there will be opportunities for all of you to connect once we are done here. You can go ahead and share your emails in the chat box here or in the main room to each other if you'd want to do that.
And it looks like we're returning to the other room here in 15 seconds or so. So if you have any other questions about cybersecurity, please feel free to reach out to me even before, and hopefully I'll see all you guys in the course at some point.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nate.